The third and final literary lens we'll be looking at for this unit is the social justice lens. So for 8.4, we'll talk about what the social justice lens focuses on and how we can apply it to Chapter 4 of Mice and Men. So our social justice lens is a theory that is focused on looking critically at race. Now, race is a rather complicated term, even though it's something we talk about all the time. So here is our definition of race. We are defining race as a group of people thought to share certain distinctive physical characteristics, such as facial structure and/or skin color. Race is socially constructed, but it has very real consequences. What I mean by that is that race is not some factual, biological thing. It's a concept invented by humans, just like money is made up. But just because humans made up money doesn't mean it isn't important. You will have a lot of trouble getting by in this life without money because we've built our society around it. Likewise, even though race is a concept made up by humans, that doesn't mean it's not significant. Race is still an important part of our society, both in terms of individual cultural understanding and in terms of oppression and bias. So, when we are using a social justice lens, again, we are focusing on these issues of race and how it impacts society and, in our case, stories. So, our key idea, to restate it again, is that race is a social construct that has led to racist systems within the way a community is structured and run. This, of course, does not mean that all communities are racist or that all systems are racist, but it asks us to acknowledge that some systems, including ones that exist and are used today, do benefit from these racist structures. And if we ignore that, then, just like with Marxism, there's no way to make changes. So systems that shape how our society is structured and run often treat individuals and groups differently based on their race and other aspects of their identity. This can be very obvious and explicit. For example, during the early history of the United States, Black Americans were not allowed to vote. That is clearly obvious racist oppression. But it can also be more subtle forms of structure as well. Who has access to different opportunities? What assumptions are made about people based on the way they talk or the way they look? And how do those effects bleed into our broader society? These systems tend to privilege and favor white people. Again, in the specific context we are looking at, since many of these systems were created by white people, early American systems were created by white people because they were the only ones with the power to vote. White people are generally treated as the default. And while some of these systems have changed and evolved over time, many of them still exist, and many of them still include these built-in aspects that can privilege white people and treat them as the norm, and therefore treat any non-white people as something other than the norm. Because of this, many people of color experience racism, which may be undercover, sometimes unconscious racism, where the people enacting it don't even realize or intend to be racist, which does not justify it, or, of course, it can certainly be explicit. So the social justice lens seeks to shift that focus away from dominant groups, groups that are treated as the norm, in this case, white groups, and instead give the perspective of underrepresented groups, in this case, people of color. Just like with our other lenses, one of the best ways to apply our lens to text is by knowing what questions to ask. So here are some key questions we can ask for a social justice focus. Firstly, where does race appear and shape the ways the characters interact with one another? Are characters treated differently based on just their race? Are characters of multiple races described in the story, or is the story focusing on just a single kind of perspective? Are characters given or denied opportunities or expected to act a certain way just because of their race? We can also look at how racism is challenged or accepted by the characters and what problems arise from this. So, if a character is treated differently or specifically experiences racism because of their race, is it framed within the text as something negative, or is it endorsed by the text? Do characters challenge racist ideas and try to change their society, or do they go along with or support these ideas? We also want to look more broadly, not just at individuals, but at systems. What systems are put in place based on race in the text? Are there laws or social expectations that characters have to follow based on their race? And more generally, how does race impact the outcomes of the characters? Would their outcomes be different if they were of a different race? Sometimes the answer may be no, but sometimes it will be yes. And if it is, we want to notice that. Lastly, how are different racial groups portrayed? Are there stereotypes used? Are different groups portrayed in an authentic and accepting way? Or are they treated as scapegoats or generalizations? Oops, and one more. Whose perspective is the dominant narrative in the text? That is, who's getting to tell the story, and whose perspective isn't shown? So, if we are taking our social justice lens and thinking about our own society, we want to be asking those questions. We can say some ways that race impacts system in our own society. There are a lot of avenues we could think of, but some options you might think about could be economics. Are there differences in pay in our society based just on people's race? If we look at statistics for what percentage of people of color versus white people make different levels of money, what patterns do we notice? We can also look at education. What does our society say about access to education? Who is more easily able to obtain education? Who is education geared towards? And what are we being taught in schools? Is it treating whiteness as a norm and any other cultures as the exception? Or is it taking a multicultural view? We can look at our leaders. Who is given power, either through being elected or through running companies? Does the distribution of people in positions of power match the distribution of different populations in the United States? That is, if I'm in a company that, let's say, has 50% white people and 50% people of color, in an equitable system, I would expect on average 50% of the leadership would be white and 50% of the leadership would be people of color, because that would just be representing the overall population. But if there's a mismatch where the actual demographics of the population are really far off from the percentages we see in groups of power, that shows that there may be systems that enable this difference. Healthcare is another huge one. There have been many papers done studying the impacts of healthcare on different communities, especially looking at ways that studies that treat white populations as the norm can be a disservice to other populations whose health may function differently and have different needs or concerns. A famous example that I am aware of is looking at studies on sunburn and suntan lotion and the ways that burns and different kinds of rashes as well are underdiagnosed in Black populations because many medical students are trained based on pictures of light skin. So that is a very specific way that we could see a largely unintentional but very impactful form of a system treating people differently based on race. So, overall, thinking about our society, who tends to be telling the dominant narratives? Who tells most of the stories? Who do we most often see speaking on TV? Who is trusted as an authority? America is a big country, and we can't have an incredibly simple answer, but we can notice patterns. And that's what we'll be doing in 8.4, looking at patterns specifically in Of Mice and Men, which has some very clear racial dynamics, and thinking about what those patterns can tell us about America in 1937, when Steinbeck is writing this book, and also about our America today. So think about who is treated as the norm, finish up your questions for 8.4 in the packet, and you'll be continuing on to read chapter 4 of Mice and Men.